What's up, guys? So I want to do a video today of my Stan Wilson Non Flipper Flipper collection. Now, if you've seen my older videos, you've seen these knives before, there's nothing new. However, I wanted to do a more informational style video. Now, the reason for that is, as I meet people for the first time and they kind of figure out my collection and who I am, by far the most questions and comments that I get are directed towards this model of knife. Generally speaking, if I'm going out to meet a group of knife guys and I know that someone has not had the opportunity to handle a non-flipper flipper, I will generally try to bring it along with me. There's nothing I enjoy more than showing off Stan's amazing work. Obviously, as you can see, I love the model. I love the Bolster flipper. I think it's absolutely genius. It's not for everybody. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but certainly, I love just handing the knife to people, watching them flip it, and just seeing their reactions and seeing if they enjoy it. And quite frankly, it's probably like 80-20. 80% of the people really enjoy it, 20% really don't. And I think people can be pretty intimidated, especially getting a knife that it's not that common, a little bit higher values to them. And, I'm hoping that you guys can watch this video if you're interested in obtaining a non-flipper flipper, and I'm hoping it answers some questions for you. Or at the very least, if you ever meet with me or a buddy or someone else who has one of these knives, you'll be much more comfortable handling it. You'll understand the mechanics a little bit more, and you'll be able to kind of appreciate the knife just a little bit more. So I'm going to basically answer all the questions right up front that I get for people from people who experience the NFF for the first time, and then at the end of the video I'm going to kind of share my thoughts, the good and bad of this knife. Now, I've been carrying this knife for quite some time, so I feel like out of all the guys out there, I have a handful of NFFs, and I can kind of really give a strong opinion on what the knife is. I'm not going to hold anything back. It's not a perfect knife. There are some compromises that have to be made, and I'll kind of show those mechanical compromises, and then you guys can make the decision if this is a knife that you would like to purchase or play with or whatever it may be. So, first of all, I'm going to clear these dress knives off the table. We'll come back to them. They're not disappearing forever. I'm just going to put them over here so I don't bump them by accident when I mess around with this knife. So, obviously, the first thing people want to do when they get it in their hands is they want to flip it. That's actually pretty easy. So, what I would recommend, if you've never handled one of these before and someone gives this knife over to you, your first instinct is you're gonna want to rocket it open and closed, and you're gonna want to look cool. Well, don't do that, okay? So when someone hands you this knife, put your thumb here, or excuse me, your index finger here, your thumb here, and remember the flipping mechanism is on the bolster on the clip side, and the way it works is the bolster will rotate. I'll use two hands to demonstrate it. And there's a little pin inside which will kick the blade up. And now you'll see, mechanically speaking, it only has about this much throw. So it relies heavily on momentum, okay? So when someone hands you this knife, don't be afraid to look stupid for the first time. Really enjoy the knife, understand the mechanics, and do this. Put your finger on the clip side bolster and do it slowly, okay? It's not gonna open all the way, but that's okay. And then with the knife open like this, actuate the bolster several times and you'll get a good feel. Then when you close the knife and you flick it again, you'll look like a pro. Okay, so most people can get the knife open. That's not the problem. So then what'll happen is someone will look cool, they'll get the knife open like this, and basically they will fidget around with it for a few seconds, realize their thumb is coming extremely close to the blade here, the sharpened edge, and they'll hand the knife back to me. Well, you don't have to do that. So let's just talk really quickly about the mechanics of this knife. Basically, it's a simple lockback. That's really all it is. The lock is up front. You can see right here, that's elevating just slightly. There's a little hook on there, and it locks the blade into place. You can actually, it's not designed to do this, but you can actually just press the back of it, just like a buck 110, and release that blade. Strong, quality lock, okay? Now, how Stan has you actuating this lock is he's put on the reverse bolster, on the show side bolster, a mechanism in there, and I hope you can see this, where if you rotate the bolster, there's a little pin in there that will pop that up. Now, let me see if you can't do this with that. You can see it. I'm just rotating the bolster. There you go. Beautiful. Okay? That's really all you're doing. So when the knife is in the open position, take your index finger, put it at the end, and all you want to do is press the bolster, not the blade itself, just the bolster. And you want to put your thumb right here at this end of the bolster to give you some leverage and kind of rotate, okay? So you can see I'm rotating, and I don't know if you can see it that well in the light here, but I'm rotating the bolster. And then the blade will just drop at that point. So once you've kind of lifted this lock higher so it disengages the blade's just going to drop. Now, it's not going to generally drop free because when it closes, again, it's going to have a little resistance just as part of the mechanism of the detent to close it. So the knife most likely won't close itself, so you're just going to have to give it a little press down. And this is a beautiful sounding knife. There's been very few knives that I've handled that sound so good opening, so good closing. This is like the Ferrari of knives, or the Lamborghini, whatever your preference is. Anyway, so again, what I would do if I were you is when you get the knife in your hand, you're going to practice like this. You're going to halfway open, halfway close, give it a close, and then with the knife closed, go ahead and just give it a little twirl here, give it a feel. Feel what it's going to feel like when you actually have the blade open, so you're not so intimidated that you're down by the sharpened edge. And I'll show you a little secret on the Non Flipper Flipper. This looks like a sharpened edge, but it's not. Okay, so you have a little bit of room here to work with. You won't cut your finger. So go ahead and put your finger right up to the edge there, right up here, and give it a pinch or twist or whatever you want to call it, and the knife should just drop free. Okay. So now we've got opening and closing. One of the comments or questions, that I get the most is, how do I get one? And I can just tell you that I've known Stan for a little while now, and he puts a ton of time and effort into every single knife. Now, by far, the non-dressed knives are just a little bit easier to make than the dressed knives, but just kind of depending what you want, just know that Stan does not really produce a lot of knives. In fact, I've known him this year. I would say, if I were to make an honest count, I would say he's probably built about 6, 7, maybe 8 of them max. I mean, he really hasn't built a ton of these knives. So the chances of you getting a knife on his books are probably pretty slim, unless you want to wait, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever his books are now. But you're most likely going to have to pick it up on the secondary. If you're on his books, you've been on for 2 or 3 years, then you probably have a good shot at getting one. However, if you weren't into Stan Wilson Non Flipper Flippers 2, 3 years ago, you're probably going to have to go on the secondary. And all I can say is just be ready. I've seen these knives really fluctuate in price. However, they've really only fluctuated up, if that makes any sense. These knives are generally on the higher end of any tactical knife. Now, I'll be honest with you. When I talk to Stan and I look at his work, he's much more towards the art knife side, and just the time it takes him to build a knife is really much more art knife than it is tactical knife. So if you're not into spending that much money on a knife to begin with, and I'm talking table prices, then this is not the knife for you. Quite frankly, I don't like spending the money. I don't think anybody likes spending the money. But for me, the genius was in the mechanism, and I just chose to spend the money. All 3 of my non-flipper flippers came off of the secondary market. I was not fortunate enough to know Stan 3, 4, 5 years ago and be on his books, so I was able to pull them off the secondary. Now, over the last year, I can tell you that I've probably seen, I would say, 6 or 7 transactions on the secondary market. So, between 12 and 15 non-flipper flippers will transact a year. If you are on his books, then it's more like, 6 to 7. So the only advice I can tell you, if you're serious about getting one and someone's handed you one and you've played with one and you want to spend the money, I would just say be ready. Be ready, because these things, they sell pretty quick. I've never really seen one sit around unless they are pretty well overpriced. I did see one, I think, that was $9,000-$10,000, and it was a little bit dressy. I think it had like a Mokutai clip on it or whatnot, but and I think that one did eventually sell. So I mean, they do sell, and I'm not quoting secondary prices or market prices because I think that all fluctuates, but that's what I saw. And for the most part, they will push into the four-figure mark. So, you know, if that's just something, and I totally understand, and I would imagine this is 99% of you, if that's just atrocious to you and it makes you mad to hear people are paying that for knives, then the non-flipper flipper is not for you. Again, Stan's not making a ton of them, so there won't be a high supply. Maybe the demand goes down. Maybe people get tired of the non-flipper flipper and they would sell it cheap. But for the most part, just understand kind of how rare, how scarce they are, and understand that the table prices for this guy right now is about $6,000. Now, when Stan first started making them, he didn't spend as much time on them as he does now, and he slowed down a little bit, but you know, I would say $5-6 grand for a dressed non-flipper flipper is about right as I speak to Stan, and I know people who are getting builds directly from Stan, and that's kind of where his pricing is at. In my opinion, again, it's well worth it. However, it's all in the eye of the beholder. I think it is infinitely harder to make a knife like this than it would be just kind of two pieces of titanium with the blade right in the middle. And I've taken this knife apart. Stan was nice enough to send me the tools. It is unbelievable. The intricacies, the little parts he makes, just everything is absolutely unbelievable. I'm not trying to sell you the knife. I'm just telling you that, you know, when you hear these prices and you hear that it takes Stan a month to make a knife, just cut him some slack. I know that, you know, you were used to having guys make, you know, 1 or 2 knives a week. And I can just tell you that these are pretty complex, you know, tools, and Stan really takes a long time to make them. So it's all relative, right? So you're paying a lot of money, but you know, he's not busting out, you know, 20, 30 knives a year. So that also helps with, you know, retaining the value if you were to get one at table price. All right. The next question I get is, who is this Stephano Nardelie guy and what are his knives like? Well, glad you asked that. So let me just show you a couple of the Nardelli knives. And one thing I can tell you is I actually don't know what Stephano is charging for these knives, but the same rules pretty much apply. I mean, it takes Stephano a long time, and he's a new maker. He's working as fast as he can, but it's not like he's producing one of these things a week. I mean, when I met Stephano, I talked to him about doing this. He had kind of asked my opinion, kind of got the blessing from Stan, and it might have been 6 months before he produced this one knife, and he had been working on it for a while. So it's not like he's making these things any faster. These things are just complex, and they are a little bit harder to make. So let me just show you. Stephano's is a little bit different. Now this is a prototype. Both of these are prototypes. Basically, I talked him into sending me the prototypes. But as we look at this knife here, this one is a full lockback, just like the Buck 110. He's elevated this, and this is how you actuate the knife. Okay? The bolster flipping is just about the same. Very satisfying. As far as build quality goes and tolerances, he's not Stan Wilson. So if you're expecting to get a Stan Wilson knife that just doesn't look like the non-flipper flipper, the Nardelli knife is not for you. Now, if you love the bolster flipper like I do, you're going to love the Nardelli knife. It's an awesome, awesome knife. The Comanche is an amazing knife. And quite frankly, in my opinion, too, he's gone one step further, and he's hidden that pivot. That's absolutely insane. I mean, if you take a look at this knife here, there is not one screw visible on this knife. And I don't care who you are, that is not easy to do. So I'm not sure what Stephano is charging, but I can tell you, as far as panache, people always ask me about him, but no, Stan Wilson, he's the knife that everybody wants. As far as feel, the non-flipper flippers definitely have a precise feel. The Nardelli knives are beautiful. They're jeweled inside and out. He really pays a lot of attention to detail, and you can hear this closing sound is, I would say, 50% of Stan's. So if you were to ask me what the Comanche versus the non-flipper flipper is, if in a percentage, I would say it's, in my opinion, about 70 to 80% of the non-flipper flipper. The non-flipper flipper feels a little bit more put together, feels a little bit heavier duty. The lines of the non-flipper flipper, that's always subjective. I think it's a little bit more of a complex grind. I think it's a little bit more of a complex looking knife. But if you're just really into the bolster flipper and you're really just into, flinging it open, the Nardelli knives I've seen available. So while the non-flipper flippers are simply not available, I know you can get a Nardelli knife. So if you really have to have Stan's brilliant design, Stephano and Stan, I know that it's not an issue where Stan is upset that he's copied his idea. In fact, it's contrary. I actually spoke to Stan about it personally, and he really wants to see Stephano do well. We actually took apart this knife. Stan and I took apart this knife at Blade Show. I think Stan was a little bit interested in how Stephano had done that. So, he was nothing more gracious and complimentary of the knife, and that was a lot of fun for me. And I'm glad to have both, to be honest with you. So as far as availability, the Comanche, I'd say go for it if you have to have it, but it's not like it's a non-flipper flipper in a different design. Just understand he's a different maker. He's a very good maker. However, he's only been doing this for, this is his first or second model or whatever it is. Stan's been doing it for decades, and so you're going to get a different level of different quality and level of workmanship. And but I think the design that Stephano has is genius. And I'm sorry I didn't show this, but on the other Comanche that I think he's selling right now, instead of the twisting bolster, you just put your thumb there. And quite frankly, it's just easier. You can do this a million different times. It's not as elegant. You can see the lock right there, so it doesn't hide it if you're looking at it from the top. But if you don't want to mess around with that pivoting bolster, quite a beautiful knife. Okay, so those are the basic 3 questions I get. Let me just show you something really quickly that I think is very, very neat. All 3 of my non-flipper flippers have 3 different widths. These are all absolutely custom knives, hand-built custom knives. Tolerances are absolutely insane. You can take a look. I mean, it's showing up on camera. I mean, you can't literally put a piece of paper in there. You can't put a hair down there. I mean, the tolerances are absolutely incredible, okay? Every single knife is a little bit different. Some knives have a little bit different of a feel than others. I can tell you that this particular knife here is kind of one of the harder ones to flip. Now I'm going to clear these other 2 off the table, and I'm going to show you what I mean, which kind of goes me towards the good, the bad, and things that you should know about this knife before you get it. So the first thing I'll tell you that it's just fun as hell. I mean, you can flip these knives forever until literally your finger is going to fall off. I mean, and it will fall off. I mean, these are not the most ergonomic little platforms here for your fingers. So they're well put together. They feel amazing. They're a little bit larger. Okay, so I'm going to put it next to a Sebenza here. You can just see it's a little bit larger, and just look how much thicker it is. So they're not small knives by any stretch of the imagination. But quite frankly, I've been doing this for a while. I've been collecting knives for a long time. There is really nothing more entertaining. Once you get it down, once you can flick a non-flipper flipper, there's nothing like it. Now, I know a lot of guys who bought non-flipper flippers and hated them because they couldn't figure it out. So I'm going to tell you a couple things. Just like I showed you, just to do it slowly at first, take the time to understand the mechanics. Okay, so hopefully you'll be able to open it. Hopefully you'll be able to close it. Now, a comment I get a lot, and I'm going to show you why this is this knife cut me when I was trying to open it. And that is true, okay? And that is due to the design. So, if you look at me opening this knife here, you'll see this elevating right there. And if your finger slips off, it can catch. Now, usually with timing, you're not going to cut yourself. However, if you don't know what you're doing and you're putting a lot of pressure and you drag your finger right along right where that edge pops up, let's try to show you. Right there, you see how the edge has just popped up ever so slightly. You will cut yourself, kind of like a paper cut, or scratch yourself. Of course, it's not going to be very deep, but you know it'll cut the skin on your finger. I don't know if you'll bleed, but certainly there'll be issues. So learn how to flip a non-flipper flipper first. The reason why people cut themselves is because they don't know what they're doing, and they'll try to rocket it down as fast as they can, and their finger will slip off. Now, the reason I have this beautiful knife here, which is one of my favorites to show you that, is because this knife here is like a beautiful, beautiful supermodel. Just looks amazing, but is, I don't want to give supermodels a bad name because I don't really know any, but it's definitely the most finicky and the most demanding. You have to put your finger kind of in the exact right place, whereas the Blackout, you can put your finger just about wherever you want. This one, because it's not as well, it doesn't come to a point and it's a little more rounded, your finger is much more prone to slip off if you don't have good grip. So you don't want to do this one particularly fast, right? You want to, this one you have to put your finger in the exact right spot. So I'm using this one as an example because this one, if you've never handled a non-flipper flipper before and I hand you this one, which quite frankly I wouldn't because I hand the other ones out before I hand this one out, this one is by far the hardest to use. Okay, I'm going to show you another thing on the non-flipper flipper and the Comanche. This happens on both of these knives. If you flick down on it, because the detent is simple friction, and I can't do it because they got the camera here, but there we go. If you flick it pretty hard, it will open, okay? So they're not the most secure knives, and believe it or not, the non-flipper flipper will do that too. Now, again, this one's pretty secure, but the Boomerang Mokutai one, if I flick it really hard, I can get it out. Now, this one, again, is a little bit more secure, so I can't do it, but it is a issue with the design. The detent is not like a standard ball detent. It's not a ball detent. So it is naturally going to be a weaker detent. So if your thing is you have to have a strong detent that you cannot flick open like this, and I just tried it, but I'll get it. And another thing I do is I'll go over a bed and I'll spin the knife as fast as I can, like this, and see if it pops open. And if it pops open, I'll readjust it, and I'll show you how to do that. So the way you adjust this knife here is there's a little pin right here, and in the Nardelli it's a T6, and in the Wilson it's a T5. And the tighter you tighten that down, the harder the detent it will be, so you'll get rid of this issue. The more detent you'll have here, but on the closing it'll be just a little bit tighter, if you will. So I keep my knives to the point where I can spin them and they won't pop open. I think that's a safety issue. However, with the bolster flipper, and I've dropped some of these knives before because I carry them, if they land on the bolster, it's opening. There's just nothing you can do about it. That's the activation point, and you're more likely to catch this corner than you would be with your standard flipper like this. If this thing falls down, this is not going to open regardless. I mean, the design won't speak to that, and the chances of you hitting this exactly where the blade pops open will be slim to none. Whereas this thing drops, it goes down like this, it very likely will catch that bolster and that knife will pop open. So not that I feel like you guys are going to be looking for these things to carry, but if you're like me and you do carry one, just understand that the blade is not as secure as, say, a standard tactical knife. This is where they kind of gravitate towards the art knives, and it's very similar, to, for like slip joints and lockbacks and things like that. They're just a little less secure than the tactical knives that are out there. So we've gone over that stuff. Those are the big negatives. Don't be afraid at all to adjust these things. I know a lot of guys that got the last set of the Comanches. For whatever reason, Stephano really likes to have his knives, just closed like that. It's kind of the new style, and I feel like a lot of knife makers are compromising a little bit of the mechanics to make the knives do things like that, which is completely drop free. And you'll see how drop free this knife is. This one, the Nardellis do not catch. They will go all the way down, but as a compromise, if I spin this one super hard, I can get it to open. This one, not so much. This one, though, if I flick it really hard, I can absolutely get it to open. No doubt about that. So just understand that design compromise with the bolster flippers. They're not the most secure detents. But like I said, they are absolutely... don't get me wrong. I don't want you to think that they're unsafe. They're going to open in your pocket. I carry these all the time. They're not opening in your pocket. I'm just saying if you drop them, flick them, again, see, I couldn't get it to open, but I'm flicking it as hard as I can, and I'll get it one of these days. If you do it exactly right with the exact wrist and the weight goes down, it will open up. Trust me, take my word on that. And the last thing I'll just say is, I know that these things are expensive, but everyone feels different. So it's just so hard to say that you'll spend all the money. I mean, most people that I've shown all of these three knives to, they would agree that this one is the hardest to actuate. There's no doubt this one's the hardest. However, half the people like this one. My personal favorite is this one. This one just flies open. This is almost like, I mean, it's like an automatic. It's the craziest thing. And I'm not sure. I know this. So they all of these, another thing, I should have put this in the negative, is that they have a spring in the return bolster right here. You can see it has some spring tension. So you got to be careful if you do what I do and flip this thing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There is potential of the spring wearing out. And I have not had the issue with the Nardelli, even though I flipped the hell out of that thing as well. But just understand that. And if you do have a non-flipper flipper that the spring goes out, I've spoken with Stan about it, and he bumps you right to the top of the line. So if you've got a spring out in your non-flipper flipper, he will absolutely get that sent back to you. If he's at home or at the shop and not out of town, then I literally have heard him doing it like the next day. So don't worry about that. However, it's a spring in there, right? And so springs will eventually fail, especially if you're flipping it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week like I am. I must have flipped these things thousands and thousands of times. Anyway, I'm sorry that was out of order, but that just absolutely crossed my mind, and you can tell these videos are not rehearsed at all, and I should probably write stuff down, and I don't. Anyways, this one just flies out, and it has a lot to do with, it's the thickest blade, it's the thickest knife, it's the heaviest knife. I mean, this thing is insane. And another thing that is not appreciated, look at the mirror finish on this, and the hollow grind is so insane. I mean, it's the craziest thing. I mean, they all are just a little bit different. So if you are looking for one, I can assure you that there's only actually a handful out there. So if you're interested in a non-flipper flipper, feel free to send me a message, because I know a lot of the owners. I know where a lot of these things are, and it's not like there's a ton of them. Everybody knows the hkwinger non-flipper flippers. Everybody knows. So for instance, they made a ton of this, or Stan made a ton of this model with the carbon fiber, with kind of the, the blued blade and bolster. But this particular one, everyone will know these as the hkwinger non-flipper flippers. And so for the most part, all of the dress ones, I kind of know who got them. All of the, I kind of know who has a lot of these non-flipper flippers. So if you have any questions, or you guys are hunting one down, I've been paying attention to these for a handful of years now, and I can probably tell you, honestly, like who Stan built it for, and kind of if the knife has been back for spot, just little things like that. So if you guys are really serious about getting a non-flipper flipper, I wish you absolutely the best of luck. I've been trying to encourage Stan as much as possible to, try to speed up production for people, and maybe slip me in there for another build. But unfortunately, perfection just takes time. So these things are going to probably continue to be a little bit limited in the future. But if you guys had any questions, please feel free to reach out to me and ask. And I wish you guys all the best of luck in hunting down one of these, if that is your thing. And if not, I thank you for watching to the end of this video, and I hope you guys have learned something. And if you guys are at the next get-together or anything like that and want to see one of these, just please reach out and let me know, and I'd be happy to show off Stan's work for you. All right, thanks a lot. Bye.